Well, hello, it's Paul CHEK, and welcome to my video blog. Today I thought I would share a few tips and give you a little bit better understanding about how to choose athletic shoes. Much of what I say here today relates to choosing shoes in general, but I'm focusing today on athletic shoes because the dynamics of athletic activities are significantly higher than just walking or moving from desk to desk or typical activities of daily living. So if your shoes aren't ideal and you're in an athletic environment, chances are much better that your shoes will not only decrease your performance, but are often the cause of injuries. So to begin with, I wanted to just give you some basic understanding of the foot and how it relates to the body. And once you understand the basics of how the foot works, then it's easier to comprehend the technical issues with regard to how to choose a shoe. So in a few short minutes, I'm going to try to give you a good solid basic understanding. The first thing we want to understand is that the foot reads the ground. So whenever you're walking, think of, remember, shoes are not something that are that we've been doing for a long time. If we wore shoes, we wore something like a moccasin, something that gave the foot tremendous dynamic ability and didn't put a lot between the foot and the ground itself. But for the largest part of human history, we were barefooted, and we're designed to be barefooted because the foot is a very complex system that senses what's on the ground and feeds information through the nervous system up to the eyes, the vestibular system, the balance centers, the upper cervical spine, even the jaw, about how to organize the muscles of the body at very high speeds when you think of how quickly you move in athletic events. So shoes can significantly either support or disrupt the natural process of how the foot and the body relate to each other to support your movement. So the first thing we got to know about the foot and how it reads the ground is that the foot goes through cycles of pronation, which means turning inward. So if you turn your hand over, that's pronation. If you can hold a cup of soup in your hand, that's supination. So that's how you remember. Up, I can hold the soup, supination. If I pour the soup out, I'm pronating. But to really understand, many people only think of pronation and supination as a foot phenomenon. It's actually a body-wide function. So just to give you a quick overview of the interrelationship of the foot, we have to understand what the foot's involved in. So the CHEK Totem Pole, which is the model I use to teach CHEK Level 3 students how to assess the body, and they learn all the way beginning an exercise coach, little components of it, but CHEK Level 3 puts the whole system together, and it's a very comprehensive training, so I can only give you a brief overview. At the top of the totem pole, you see the bird. The bird represents the soul or the psyche. So this is your mind's interaction with your body. Now, the key thing we want to remember at the level of the psyche is that the foot is essentially the link to the ground, but it's just like the rest of your body, the foot is very influenced by your posture. So many people have overpronation, but don't realize that their overpronation is often a postural expression of their mental-emotional state. In the book Somatics by Thomas Hanna, he gives a description of two types of posture. A green light posture, which is a go posture, is someone who's upright, extended, and ready for action. So that posture is more oriented around supination. Now at the top of the totem pole, you also see right below the psyche is the symbol for breath, for breathing. So to understand now the green light posture, which is a supination posture, that's coupled with inhalation. When you inhale, your rib cage expands and the curves of your spine decrease and you get taller. So when a person inhales, they get taller. And when they exhale, the curves of their spine increase and they get shorter. So as the body inhales and lengthens, it goes into supination. So the word supination is also directly related to coming out of the fetal position. So the word supination means to extend, to abduct, to take away from the middle, and to externally rotate or supinate. So supination then is coming out, abducting, and turning over, or supination. Pronation is exhalation, which means adduction, flexion, and internal rotation. So full pronation would be the fetal position, and that would also equal full exhalation. So if a person's not breathing correctly, it disrupts the body's rhythmic cycles of supination and pronation, which are very small movements in many places. Skilled therapists can feel them and monitor them, but most people are unaware. But the key point is, pronation of the body, someone who is, shall we say, depressed, will pronate the whole foot. And all the exercises in the world won't help if you have a problem up here at the top of the totem pole, because the top of the totem pole, the psyche, regulates the function of the body. The body's like a puppet, and the psyche is like the hand in the puppet animating it. So if the hand in the puppet is in a depressive posture, the whole body goes into pronation, and footwear won't really help that much. It actually can cause problems, because it will cause the foot to be forced into supination in many instances of athletic shoes, while the body stays in pronation, which puts tremendous amounts of torque in the knee, leading to a lot of knee problems such as meniscal tears. So moving down, very briefly, breathing, the function of the jaw, the eyes, the inner ear, and the upper cervical spine, the internal organs, the emotions, and the pelvis are all superior control systems that regulate the pelvic girdle, the spine at large. Here we have the sacrum, which is part of the pelvic girdle because the spinal cord connects to the sacrum. So down here, the foot's all the way at the very bottom, but it's what's reading the ground, and it has to send information up so that all these centers up here can integrate all the information from the environment outside of you, such as what you're looking at, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, and what you're feeling, and then it has to integrate that information with the foot, so you have a ground-up flow of information and a top-down flow of information. The two have to meet and integrate, and this has to happen extremely fast. Think of how quick an athlete moves in a football game or a tennis match. So if your shoes are not ideal for your needs, it can cause a lot of confusion in the body that leads to wear and tear, inflammation, and chronic pain. So now that we understand that pronation is a body-wide phenomenon that's coupled with exhalation and moving toward the fetal position, and supination is a body-wide phenomenon that means moving out of the fetal position, we're in position to understand that shoes are generally made so there's either minimal control or progressively more control of pronation. Most people that have foot control problems pronate due to lack of core control and things that I'll discuss. There's a small number of people out there that overly supinate, but they're not nearly the common group. So now that we know that the foot is reading the body, and that the next thing we got to know is when the foot strikes the ground, it strikes the ground on the lateral edge and disperses the load and the ground reaction force across the bones. And underneath the foot is the connective tissue called plantar fascia, which you can see in, well, the diagram doesn't show the plantar fascia, but the plantar fascia runs from the heel and covers the muscles of the foot. The plantar fascia is continuous with the Achilles tendon and the aponeurosis of the soleus, the long tendons of the hamstrings, which then merge into the sacrotuberous ligament, which then comes up and mixes with the sacroiliac ligaments in here to stabilize the pelvis. So the foot sends information and stores kinetic energy, which are stored in these large sheets of connective tissue that act literally like giant kinetic rubber bands. They store energy when they stretch, and they release it back to you as you propel yourself in gait. This is a very complex system, of which I'm just giving you the very basics of. And all these muscle systems work to store energy in these connective tissues to give it back to you. For most of you are aware of this. Think of how much energy it takes to run in loose sand at the beach versus running on a hard-packed trail or a sidewalk. The foot loses a lot of energy into the sand, therefore the body has to work very hard. So if you're wearing a shoe, for example, that's too soft and mushy, it absorbs a tremendous amount of your energy and does not give an adequate feedback into the system and can confuse the system. So now what I want to share with you is as that foot goes through pronation, it distributes the load. If the foot goes too far, it puts too much torque in the joints. So as this foot goes into pronation, we've got to remember that as the foot pronates, it turns inward. When the foot turns inward, the knee turns inward and the hip turns inward, which causes the pelvis to tip anteriorly. When the pelvis tips forward like that, it unlocks the sacroiliac joint. So as you're coming across your leg, the pelvis naturally tips forward to give you some unlocking of that joint. But when the foot strikes the ground, the pelvis is tipping slightly backwards, and that stabilizes the joint. So when the foot's about to strike the ground, there's tension created here, and on the other side, the core muscles have to fire, and the belly button should move in as the impact is about to happen. That causes what's called the Nutcracker Effect, pulling the two halves of the pelvis together. So the belly button comes in, pulls the two halves of the pelvis together, stabilizing the sacrum, giving the leg a solid platform for transfer of kinetic energy all the way through the spine up to the head and back down to the ground again. So there's some key issues here. Many people are buying shoes to support overpronated feet and have foot problems, plantar fascia, Achilles tendon problems, knee pain, etc. But they often forget that if you look at the human body, you'll see, as I show in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, on page 121, all these muscles that control your core and these bones, which have to be stabilized first to give your leg a working foundation, have neurological relationships with all these organs. So every one of these organs actually shares sensory information with the muscles on the same neurological channels coming out of the spine. The muscles of the lower leg, of the leg, and the pelvic girdle are largely connected to your digestive organs and your eliminative organs. So if someone has inflammation in their small intestine, say from eating gluten, and they don't know they're gluten intolerant, that can inflame the organ, causing it to swell, which causes the muscles to relax to make room for it, to make sure there's an adequate blood supply, which then reflexively shuts the core down, because as I showed on my totem pole, the organs are way up high compared to the joints down there. So the body will not sacrifice an organ to keep a knee or a foot healthy. Your foot cannot digest your food and keep you alive, but your organs can. So anytime somebody's got problems in their organs, distension, fluid in the tissues, not pooping well, not digesting well, etc., etc., running out and buying shoes to make your knees, your back, or your feet feel better is usually putting a dangerous Band-Aid on a much, much bigger problem that might make your foot feel better, but often forces the stress up higher in the chain, leading to knee, hip, and low back, and often neck pain as well. So now that we understand some of the basic concepts of what we have to think about, let's go back to that concept of the foot reading the ground. If I put my foot in a shoe that's very heavily constructed and rigid, my foot now has to go inside of this box and try to read the ground at very, very high speeds, the speeds that athletic sports are played at. And now imagine what it would be like to take and tape all your hands together and try to drive your car, comb your hair, brush your teeth, all the things that you do with a hand. Well, if you just imagine what it would be like to cast your hand with tape That's what it's like to put your foot inside of a rigid shoe. You lose a lot of the independent function, and it acts like a brace. Whenever you brace a back or a neck, as a therapist, you know you don't have very long before you start losing muscle mass, because when the brace is on, the muscles and joints can't move properly, so it leads to progressive weakening. Shoes are like back braces. They guarantee that your feet will weaken and not function well, and they make your feet stupid. If you don't use it, you lose it. So the next thing I wanted to share with you is that you can see that here's a shoe with a lot of control. Here's the shoes I used to train in for years, this model, before Fivefingers were invented. And the key thing here is this shoe does not have a lot of cushion in it. I'm right on the ground. It's just hard rubber. There's no mushy stuff inside that shoe. So I used to use these shoes because I had very good feedback from the ground. I could feel things through them, but they were still far inferior to a Fivefinger. So now when we look at the Fivefinger, you can see you have a very flexible shoe. It's like a condom for the foot. You've got independent toe action. The foot can breathe. This is basically as close to a bare foot as you can possibly get, yet still have protection from the elements, from stones, etc. But it gives you a normally functioning foot and has immediate feedback. You feel the ground directly through that shoe, and it gives your body information that's accurate and has not been modified by any other substance such as blown EVA or the various types of rubber they make running shoe and athletic shoe soles out of. So if you take that and consider that as you're running, when your foot strikes the ground, it needs to feel the ground. When you put rubber between the foot and the ground, you're now trying to feel two surfaces. You're feeling the earth, but you're also feeling the changes, and the foot will move a lot on top of a lot of these rubber shoe soles. They tell you it's to give you more comfort, but what they don't realize is it's just like driving a car with tires that are only half inflated, and you're all over the place. So now the brain's got a big problem because it has to calculate the kinetic energy and organize the responses to that kinetic energy to keep the joints functioning optimally so they don't self-destruct, to keep muscle patterns coordinated. But now the brain is picking up two different messages. One that's mushy and therefore constantly moving, and then the ground itself, and it causes tremendous problems because our bodies are not designed to calculate how to recruit muscles quickly through a mushy, flexible, unnatural surface. So this causes what's called a proprioceptive lag. Proprioception means sensing where you're at in space. The more of a cushion you have under any shoe, the more lag time there is before the information about the ground makes it to your brain. And when it gets there, it has to be interpreted as, well, what's coming from the shoe and what's coming from the ground? When you're moving at the speed most athletes do, that cannot happen. So if your foot's in the wrong position because your shoe's mushy and the wrong kind of shoe for your body, you're going to get hurt. And it might be slow niggles that just build up and cause problems. So when you have a Fivefinger, you have very direct connection right to the earth, and there's instant feedback. Now, not everybody can just jump in Fivefingers right off the bat because most people's cores are not working, and that, if you have an overpronated flat foot, you're not going to get a lot of support for that. So my advice is to start wearing Fivefingers for short periods of time to activate the foot and stimulate the core muscles and activate the body progressively because it'll affect your whole body. When your feet get a little bit sore, take them off, wear your normal shoes, and try to build your time up progressively till you can walk in them comfortably all day long. Then begin to do exercise in them, and again, just do short periods of time. Don't go for long runs. Just slowly build your body up until it feels good. And if you read my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, I show you several tests for the core and how to identify if you have inflammation in your organs that can be shutting everything off. And on page 121, I give you a diagram that shows exactly which nerves from which organs connect to which parts of the spine and the muscles, so you can figure out right what organ or gland might be related to your structural problems. So the next tip I want to share with you is that there's a basic rule that I teach for purchasing shoes. If you have a high arched foot, high arched feet are typically rigid feet. They're quite stiff. So if you have a high arched rigid foot, you need the opposite quality in a shoe. So a high arched stiff foot requires a very flexible shoe. You don't want to add stiffness to a stiff foot. If you have a floppy, overpronated foot, then you're going to need more rigidity in that shoe. And while you're getting your core working and figuring out why that foot's in a faulty position, you may need the support of an orthotic. But I would never give somebody an orthotic until their eyes, ears, teeth, upper cervical spine, and organs had been checked for function, because every one of those can cause overpronation of the feet and lead you to putting an orthotic underneath your foot when the pronation is actually an effective compensation for the dysfunction. If you put a orthotic in somebody's foot who's overpronating, and you're treating the pronation as though it's the problem, but it's coming from somewhere higher up in the totem pole, remember that as the foot goes to pronate, it will be blocked by the arch support. That will stop pronation from happening, so forces cannot be distributed through the foot effectively. When the foot's blocked like that, and the foot strikes the ground, if the foot's on an orthotic that's blocking pronation, as you go into pronation, it'll stop the knee and the foot from turning, which results in the knee turning on top of the tibia. So the femur will turn on top of the tibia, which commonly leads to wear and tear of the meniscus, ultimately cracking and breaking the meniscus. And I've seen more cases like that than I can possibly count. If you don't compensate at the knee, if the knee can't take the compensation, it'll happen at the hip, SI joint, and low back. So you see a lot of knee and particularly back problems related to people who have pronation problems because of core dysfunction, neck dysfunction, jaw dysfunction, eye dysfunction, and breathing dysfunction, or sad sack posture. Yet when you put orthotics under that, you disrupt the natural movement of the foot and how kinetic energy moves through the body. So you end up with a nice shiny orthotic in your shoe, and you spent $375, and now you can't figure out why you're in the doctor getting your ACL repaired or your back operated on. Okay, so in summary, pronation moves toward the fetal position, supination out of the fetal position. Every breath you take, which is 25,900 a day on average, your body goes through a cycle of inhalation, supination, exhalation, pronation. That movement affects every bone in your body all the way down to your toes. If that movement is not normal because there's dysfunction in the psyche or the glands, the organs, muscles, or joints, then you're going to have to be very, very careful what you do down there at the foot. If you're trying to fix the foot, which is a symptom of problems higher up in the totem pole, and you brace it, your body will have to pronate somewhere else to compensate to keep the breathing structure functioning, which is the pumping system which circulates blood, lymphatic fluid, and even is related to pumping cerebrospinal fluid. Also remember that if you have a rigid foot, you need a flexible shoe. If you have a flat, mushy foot, you need more support in your shoe, but usually what you need more than support in your shoe is the correct diet, exercise, and lifestyle modifications to correct your posture. Once your posture's correct and your organs are working properly, you got your head right, and you remember how to smile and laugh. If you still have overpronated feet or flat feet, then it's worth considering a well-made orthotic by somebody who's very skilled at making orthotics for athletic shoes. Thanks for joining me today. Hope you enjoyed this little blog on how to choose shoes. I'll look forward to sharing something else with you real soon. I'm Paul CHEK.